live and die by their tools, but not all templates are created equal. In this BA Bytes episode, I will break down 10 essential templates that every BA needs in their toolkit, regardless of their skill level. Whether you're contracting or consulting or embedded in a permanent role, these templates will help you frame, communicate, and deliver value faster. It'll allow you to save time, reduce chaos, and start following some standard, better BA practices. And to others, you'll start showing up like a senior, even if you're just starting out.
The Better Business Analysis Institute
presents the Better Business Analysis podcast with
Benjamin Walsh.
Welcome back to this BA Bytes episode on the Better Business Analysis podcast. Now, why are templates underrated? They're actually underrated. It's easy to find templates. You can always Google them, so they're easy to find. But to find a decent template that helps you along the way and connects to another template that connects to another template, which is all part of your delivery journey, that's essential. And so I'm going to give you some templates. They're not theoretical templates, by the way. They're actual ones I use, and they're part of the Better Business Analysis framework. So number one, we start with the Agile BA plan template. Now, I've talked about this. This is the idea that you're clarifying when you first start, regardless of what type of project, regardless if it's an Agile project. So that Agile here means agility of the plan, not necessarily the project management approach. And this allows you to clarify your analysis approach from whenever you're dropped into a project. It allows you to both get and provide clarity to your stakeholders. The sections include the project context, so the context of the project. Write that up in 2 paragraphs. If you can't summarize what the project's about in 2 paragraphs, you need to talk to your project manager and you need to make that clear. It's not clear to you, it's not clear to the stakeholders. What are you reporting up? That's generally a good pack, like a monthly reporting pack. For a project manager, they will have to report and they'll have to do a couple of lines on the project. What does that say? What is the scope of your analysis? What are you going to do as part of your business analysis? Is it simply to produce requirements, detailed requirements, or just high-level requirements? Are you going to be involved in the delivery phase or not? So this is more around setting you up for success. It's not about the tools that we use to do the analysis. It's about what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? Why are you going to do it? And when are you going to do it? Okay, so it talks about the key artifacts that you're going to produce. And you agree with this with the project manager. So you say, these are my steps. Goes into a project plan. This is what I plan to do. Does that fit in with the rest? Yes, it does. Cool. I'll put in, project manager might say, I'll put in 20 hours for you to, do some workshops. You're like, well, actually, this is kind of, let me think about that. This is the approach I'm going to take. And you might take their lead. If they are more experienced than you or you don't know where to start, then maybe you go with that and go, okay, that's fine, but I want to check in after I've done a couple of workshops just to see if that's enough time and agree that that time might need to be pushed out. And then you can say, these are the actual BA artifacts I'm producing, which we just talked about. So actual BA things. So what I'm talking about are maybe you're going to produce a requirements traceability matrix. Maybe you're going to produce a stakeholder map starting off with to know who to engage with if it's a big project. And then deliverables, which those artifacts I talked about are kind of, if you like, waypoints. They are things you produce, which the project manager, you might be interested in, a few people in the project team might be interested in. The deliverable is almost the outcome that your wider stakeholders are interested in. So the requirements, are they user stories? What is the deliverable that shows up for the business here, or for another team like the tester, producing the user stories down to a point where they can be turned into test cases, which is the most common use case for a BA. And the idea is that this Agile BA plan, it's adaptive for any waterfall setup or hybrid and Agile. I have to keep saying that because I've called it the Agile BA template. Now, this is simply an Excel spreadsheet. So it is simply these headings in an Excel spreadsheet. And I will, if you join our club in the future, which is launching soon, you'll get a copy of this template to use, which consistently gets updated and has some examples. Number 2 is the stakeholder map and matrix. And I have to say, I've been pretty lax on this one myself. If I'm doing a huge customer engagement area and I don't have a change manager, and usually I'm in a size of project where I do, they will manage the stakeholder map or work with me on it. And I don't generally own it. I just help populate it. And it's really got, what are the RASCI, who's involved, what kind of engagement do they need? And it kind of sits well there. And the flip side of that is when I've done things like we're rolling out phones, it was one of my first jobs, VoIP phones. And it was, who needed what phone, what was their phone number. It was just a list of users really, and maybe their security rights and what they needed to do. And so that's a type of stakeholder matrix there. But when I talk about this particular template, I am talking about understanding the influence and interest that your stakeholders play in your engagement. And so I think it's really important, if you're not used to having this in your head, and maybe I'm good at this, it's really to understand, okay, I've got a project manager. Who is the business owner for this piece of work? Is there a product owner? Is there a product manager? Who's the sponsor? So the business owner is the person who's kind of your person who's kind of, I guess, accountable for it. But then you've got someone who's ultimately paying for it, the responsible owner. So that senior responsible owner, or also known, as your sponsor, is the person paying for it. And that generally could be an executive level, or the CEO of your company, or maybe someone external to your company. So that's the sponsor. That's the person who's putting the money up and has ultimately got they want to know red, amber, green. They want to know whether or not the thing's going well. Now, they are not the person that you generally are doing business with. And so the business owner is usually the person in the area of the business where you're making change. So that's just the top tip there. And it's the reason why this is important, especially for a junior BA, is that it maps out which stakeholders are most important, and it kind of avoids a lot of rework. It also avoids getting a whole lot of feedback for an area from a stakeholder who is not responsible for that area, accountable, or even really contributes that much to it. So the loudest person in the room, for example, they may not be someone that you need to spend as much time with. They're talking to you though, and they want to tell you their opinion. And so you suck up all your time doing that as a junior, and actually that person is just someone who's maybe interesting, and they may have some valid points too. I'm not dismissing that, but that's not where you should be spending your time when you're a junior. And I think we all get caught up in that. And the columns you really have, again, an Excel spreadsheet. It's just the role, kind of the interest level. Look at, again, RASCI is a really good model for that. Their influence is really important. Like, are they influential? Are they someone who's quiet? Are they someone who doesn't push? Are they someone who just wants it done? And, what is their preferred comms? Now, is it something like you need to meet with this person once a week? A business owner, for example, when you're a project manager, and especially if you're a junior BA, you might work with a project manager, and you might meet with your business owner once every couple of weeks or once a month. And then if you're working with a product owner and you're a BA, you might meet with them every day in a stand-up situation, or more likely once a week. And I would say in modern day projects, once a week is generally more than enough. The levers don't particularly change unless you're in a high performing product function, where you're producing features within a limited scope on a project. the concept of having daily stand-ups, for the purposes of talking about what you're going to do next and refining the backlog, isn't really something that happens in reality if you're not working on a product like that. So if you're in a more project space, then once a week is generally okay, because you're actually spending time doing analysis, spending time running things up. You're spending most of your time actually engaging with your end customers who you're going to be providing value to. And that's the way that the world works. Number 3, which I've talked about a lot. So I think if you want to, this one we've kind of nailed, if you like, and it's the problem statement canvas, okay? Or you could just call it a problem statement template. And we use the 5 W's and the 2 H's, which is, of course, from the level 1 course, which is around, why, when, who, and where, and then we've got the 2 H's, which is how and how much. So that 5W 2H model is a common model. I didn't come up with it, but it's a really good one. And that is an example that keeps the conversation focused, especially with senior stakeholders, and it gets everyone aligned to what is a problem. And again, there's so many good episodes on that. But the final talking point before we go on to number 4 here is that a majority of projects start with a solution in mind, and the problem is hidden. So if you're a junior out there, your job is really to find out what the problem is. And that should form the statement of that, 2-paragraph project context. We're solving this problem. It's very common for that not to be the case, though. Okay, and that's the first piece of value you can add. The next one, of course, is the process model or the BPMN diagram template. So this is where we show, we visualize how things work or don't. We map out processes, and that really, I think, is the number one difference between what a BA does and anyone else. And call them a process analyst if you want, but I don't think that's quite right, because drawing a process diagram and analyzing it and being able to capture it completely is actually a different role down to documentation. And it's our superpower because it allows us to really articulate simply, very, very simple, in simple terms, provide clarity to the problem at hand. And it's really the jobs to be done in order to get whatever outcome is that customer is trying to do in that process. And that's where you can see the pain points and whatnot. And that's generally your problem domain, or it is your problem domain. And using that template, there are lots of ways you can do it. You can use draw.io if you don't want to spend any money. Visio is the tool I've used since I was, first on the job. But effectively, you are mapping out processes. And again, I've got some great podcast episodes on how to do that. BPMN is the gold standard for that, but you can get up to a 80% kind of BPMN. It does kind of avoid the point of having a kind of a great looking diagram that doesn't kind of take it to the extremes. However, that's really where you land. If you bring a BPMN diagram to someone who doesn't really understand what the different symbols mean, generally a stakeholder, then you can spend too much time actually explaining what it is. I would suggest if you are doing that, do that lower level, and then at the higher level, draw just normal process flows. I've got a great template that I use. It's part of the toolkit that we provide as part of membership. And it doesn't matter what it looks like. It really matters what it looks like. It matters where the words are. It matters, the iconography. It matters the kind of, all the templating, how you message it, the layers you use. It's so important. And so it's a whole art to do that well. Number 5 is the lean canvas. You could use the change canvas or the business canvas. They're all the same concept, which is to try and frame up strategy on one page. And the lean canvas, which we have talked about many times before, and there's great podcasts out there that talk about it in much more detail than I do. But it really sets up change initiatives or startups or working with execs in their language in a very easy to understand way. And usually this one pager kind of looks like a reporting one pager, and it could be a reporting one pager, as in it could articulate what your project is on a page, and then maybe under that it could have some status options. And again, the best way to do that, I mean, I wouldn't suggest Excel maybe, but maybe an online tool or even a PowerPoint slide would be really good as a template here. It's got different boxes with different labels that mean different things, and it builds in alignment with your business model thinking. Again, I'm not going to go into huge detail, but I think it's really important to have one of these in your toolkit. All three, the lean canvas for if you're in a startup, but it's still useful to do for a business. It asks simple questions, and if you can't answer those questions, you really need to go back to talking to your project manager. Business model canvas is an internal looking one, and a change canvas is showing what your change initiative and how what that impact is to your business. Number 6 is the high level requirements table. So this is the priority epics linked to objectives or themes, whatever language you're using, and it helps control scope. And this is something that I harp on about at the Better Business Analysis Institute all the time. It's probably my number one piece of advice for a BA once they understand process modeling, how to write a user story. Then I say, that this area is the number one area that projects fail on. And it's really to how do you articulate scope in a way which is very clear and articulate and has traceability all the way down to requirements, testing, features, and whatnot. And that's your epic level. And it forces early thinking about feasibility, viability. Are there any gaps? What's the value you're providing? And it's simply using the same format as the story template format, the user story template, epic ID, description, a link to an objective, which is so important. The priority and the acceptance criteria are very high level. And if that is locked in, that is such the most important piece of the puzzle that I've added to my toolkit, and it's changed projects and made them more successful as a result of doing that. So that's a really, really hot one. And obviously we have some templates that we use. You could just use Excel for that. And it is something you need to research a little bit. Number 7, you should be a little bit kind of used to, which is when it's called the detail requirements catalog. I don't really like the name, but the idea is that this is where you are translating those high-level epics into user story sprints. So it's the transition state between epics and user stories. Okay, so this is a little bit different to working in Jira and elaborating the user stories. This is another step that doesn't get done well by BAs, and we have some problems here. So you should really understand the pieces of the puzzle, the tasks that need to be done in order to complete the epic at a function and functionality level and non-functional level. And that allows you to have some traceability. It allows you to link to and do your traceability matrix, which is our next template. But it also provides clarity in terms of what needs to be done in what order. So another way of really articulating this, I think, for number 7 would be a user story map. Okay, I think that's really what we're trying to achieve here. It's what drops out of the epics and what needs to be done in what sequence. This is your first cut high-level requirements. And you use them best. Are they independent? Are they negotiable? Are they valuable? Can you estimate them at some degree? And estimation's interesting anyway. Are they small and are they testable? And then So that's number 7. Then it drops into number 8, which is the requirements traceability matrix, where this all comes together. So that's where you're mapping the user stories to the epics and the business objectives. Okay. And again, that's an Excel spreadsheet. And that's essential if you're doing a regulated industry or you're delivering project heavy stuff. Not so much for product here. Now, requirements traceability matrix is something you do for other people, as well as yourself, of course, but this is where it all lands. This is one of these artifacts, and it helps new team members understand the project very fast, understands the level of abstraction. It allows you to link to your processes, and you can use it to track status all the way through. So before we had Jira and DevOps, we used requirements traceability matrix, and we just had statuses in it and vendor responses and where things were happening. And you still use a requirements traceability matrix if you're going out for RFP and you're producing requirements, you're managing it, you do it all in there. Which is just an Excel spreadsheet. And, we've got some really good templates for that. This is probably one, if not the number one critical template you should have. So this and your process template, they should be your minimum 2 templates you have in your toolkit. So start today if you don't have those. And the difference here is that when you've done your, what we call a user story map or a detailed requirements catalog, that's your thinking phase, your visualization, and then you're dropping everything into your requirements traceability matrix. And if you're working in an agile delivery sprint way, then this is your starting point. You do this before you enter into your delivery sprints, okay? And this then gets all the user stories and all the links ideally get moved across to Jira, and then the requirements traceability matrix becomes locked in those projects. Number 9 is your persona and empathy map. I think this is really important, and again, something that BAs don't do, or they leave the human-centered design team to do, which is amazing because a lot of the human-centered design teams I meet do not have empathy, or they're not able to really figure out who their personas are. They're really focused on the service design elements. And this is where you are building insights to actually get used. And the personas are so important because it stops stakeholders providing some guesswork and just looking white. This has come from the world of marketing. It's really understanding that you have a return on investment for the money spent. And you go, oh, that's very dry. But that's exactly what we do in a project. We're investing, but in this case, we deal in the commodity of value. And you need to understand who is getting the value out of this. Not everyone in New Zealand, not everyone in America. What is the people that are getting the value? You need to find those people, and there'll be, a set of them. That's why we have a set of personas. And then you need to understand what their characteristics are. And this is so important because not only can you use this in user experience testing or your service design initiatives, the personas themselves provide the different variations for testing. And what I mean by that is, say you've got a requirement to say, I don't know, it's just a very, very basic requirement around having a description screen that explains what your app does and provides, a little bit of a how-to and a kind of get started option, right? That's the user story. Now, if you had different personas and one of your personas was maybe someone who didn't speak English, then that would provide a test case to make sure that, and a requirement ideally, that you've got a multilingual kind of landing page that allows this person with this language to have the feature to change it into their language. And so that's just a really basic example, which can be turned into a requirement. But you have more subtle pieces, which is just like, for example, the different test scenarios can come from your personas. 10 is to have a requirements pack of some description. Now, these used to be called business requirements documents, and they were Word documents, and they were huge. And that is fine, and it would have some sections, and you might even be given one of those. This is probably most common, that if there's a BA team existing and they have some templates, you'll get a little Word document, you have to fill it all in. It is so restrictive in terms of thinking, but it might give you some ideas. You need a context diagram. It might then say, where are your processes, current and future state. It's the old way of doing it. And then it would say, what are your requirements? Now, that's all good. It shows you almost a flow. So what juniors would do is they would start at the start of that that template, that Word document, and they just start filling it in from top to bottom. And that was a method. That's the method for analysis. And I've done that many a time. That's fine. If you're more comfortable with the delivery journey, which we've talked about, and go to our website if you're not comfortable with it, and become a member once we start that plan. But the idea is that you should follow the project phases and do the most appropriate thing in that phase, right? Of that project. So if you're in the early stages, you should really be finding out what scope is and doing the high level requirements. So that's important, and using Word templates, okay. However, people don't read them. So the problem is they might read them once. So I would strongly suggest that you have a requirements pack in PowerPoint. And the reason I do that is that, one, you can present it, and yes, people moan about the fact that people still use PowerPoint. It actually forces you to write things in a concise and clear way. And if you can't articulate what's going on in your project in like 20 slides with everything and all your analysis along the way, you can use the sections from the Word template if you want, right? But you can jump around a bit more, and you can present the slides that you've got, hide the rest. So it's a really, really good way of doing and constructing business requirements for an external audience. So that's number 10. I hope you learned something today. They are the top essential templates that every BA needs. We've talked about it before, but it's just a reminder that if you want to get ahead from being a junior or even an intermediate BA who's plodded around to being a senior, this is really one of those tangible steps that you can take today to really make yourself a better BA. I'll see you next week.